From 1912 to the mid-1920s, the Harley-Davidson Sidecar was a common sight across America's dirt roads and city streets. Designed to turn a solo motorcycle into a family machine, it brought mobility to workers, soldiers, and even entire households. It achieved mass adoption, with thousands sold in just a few short years. Yet behind the popularity lay mechanical challenges, cultural doubts, and engineering compromises. Critics said it was awkward and unsafe. Users relied on it as their only affordable vehicle. These are the shocking secrets of the 1912 Harley-Davidson Sidecar, the family motorcycle on three wheels. The year was 1912. Harley-Davidson had been in business less than a decade, still a young company with only a handful of employees in its earliest years. America was in motion. Cities were growing, factories were booming, and families were beginning to dream of owning machines that could take them beyond the reach of train lines and horse-drawn wagons. Cars, however, were still expensive. Even the Ford Model T, which had launched in 1908, was priced far beyond what a working family could afford in its early years. A motorcycle, by comparison, was within reach. But motorcycles had a glaring flaw. They were built for one. A breadwinner might ride to work, but the wife and children stayed behind. Enter the sidecar. Borrowed from European designs that had appeared as early as 1903, the idea was simple. Attach a third wheel and passenger chair to the side of a motorcycle, and suddenly the two-wheeler became a three-wheeled family vehicle. For Harley-Davidson, this was revolutionary. It wasn't just selling freedom to the lone rider. It was offering freedom to an entire household. The 1912 Sidecar was marketed with pride. It promised practicality, shared journeys, and the dignity of owning something that could rival the car. But as with many early inventions, the reality was more complicated than the dream. At first glance, the Harley Sidecar looked like a clever solution. Three wheels should mean more balance, more control, and more safety, at least in theory. In reality, what it lacked was true stability. The geometry of the machine was flawed from the start. The sidecar wheel didn't line up perfectly with the motorcycle wheels, creating uneven forces. Turn right, and the sidecar would sometimes lift clean off the ground. Turn left, and the motorcycle itself threatened to tip over. The most obvious example came from rural riders. Farmers in Wisconsin reported that on gravel paths, a quick swerve could send the sidecar bouncing into the air like a wild bronco. What should have been a safe ride for children often became a nerve-wracking gamble. Harley engineers understood the problem, but they were trapped between physics and profit. The business reason was clear. The company couldn't afford to delay. With Ford's Model T gaining traction, Harley needed to expand its market fast. The consequence was a product that delivered mobility, but also demanded caution. Ask almost any user what frustrated them most, and they would tell you, every corner felt like a test of courage. Owners learned tricks: lean your body to one side, slow before turns, distribute cargo weight carefully. But these tricks revealed a truth. The sidecar wasn't as stable as it looked, and yet, despite its instability, families kept buying them. Because, in an era with few alternatives, even flawed mobility was better than none. The advertising images of the time were beautiful. Women dressed in fine hats sat comfortably in the sidecar. Children leaned against the rails. The rider looked confident and proud. But those images were illusions. In reality, the sidecar lacked true comfort. The passenger compartment had no suspension. Every bump and rut on America's unpaved roads jolted through the thin seat and into the passenger's spine. The most obvious example was reported in small-town newspapers. Children falling asleep in the sidecar often woke up crying from the rough vibrations. What it lacked was shock absorption. something that even the cheapest automobiles were beginning to offer. Still, Harley's business strategy was focused on affordability. Adding suspension would raise costs, so the design remained simple: steel tubing, a wooden floorboard, and a thin cushion. The consequence was endurance. Families took journeys, yes, but they were journeys filled with aching backs, sore muscles, and sometimes bruised ribs from sliding against the metal frame. And yet, for many, it was worth it. Because the sidecar allowed something priceless: a shared road. Even in discomfort, families experienced freedom together. The motorcycles of 1912 were light and efficient, but attach a sidecar, add a passenger or two, and load luggage, and the small V-twin engine suddenly struggled. Hill climbing became the ultimate test. The most obvious example came from San Francisco. Riders reported that their Harley with sidecar could barely crawl up steep city streets, often requiring passengers to get out and walk. In reality, the sidecar transformed the motorcycle from nimble to sluggish. What it lacked was gearing powerful enough to handle the extra burden. The business reasoning was unavoidable. Harley couldn't risk overhauling its engines just for the sidecar market. The solution? Leave it as it was and let the riders adapt. The unexpected consequence was ingenuity. Owners learned to modify carburetors, tweak gear ratios, and sometimes even hitch horses to help with hills. Ask almost any user what frustrated them most, and they'd point to the moment the machine slowed to a crawl while the family inside waited in silence. It was a flaw that symbolized the larger problem. Motorcycles had been designed for speed and freedom, not heavy-duty family hauling. By 1914, the debate was unavoidable. Was the sidecar truly safe? Critics claimed no. Unlike cars, which enclosed passengers in a protective shell, the sidecar left them exposed, vulnerable, and dangerously close to traffic. The most obvious example was side collisions. A car that struck the sidecar struck directly at the passenger, with nothing more than a thin layer of metal and wood to shield them. What it lacked was structural safety. Newspapers carried reports of accidents, some minor, others tragic. But Harley countered, was a horse cart any safer? Was a bicycle? The company insisted that responsibility lay with the rider, not the machine. Families, priced out of cars, often accepted the risk. And so, the sidecar became both criticized and defended. Unsafe in theory, but necessary in practice. The consequence was a cultural divide. For some, the sidecar represented recklessness. For others, it was resilience, the determination to have family mobility, even if danger came with it. When America entered World War I, the sidecar gained a new identity. Harley-Davidson supplied over 20,000 motorcycles to the U.S. Army, many equipped with sidecars. The family vehicle now carried soldiers, stretchers, and sometimes mounted machine guns. The most obvious example was the Harley Model J with sidecar, deployed by military police in France. In reality, the battlefield revealed what American families already knew. The sidecar was versatile but flawed. What it lacked was consistent performance across mud, snow, and rough terrain. But business logic prevailed. War contracts meant survival for Harley-Davidson. The company grew massively during the war, cementing its reputation. The unexpected consequence was irony. The same sidecar, once sold as a safe family carriage, now rolled into battlefields, carrying soldiers into gunfire. It blurred the line between domestic life and military necessity. And after the war, thousands of surplus sidecars returned home, bought cheaply by civilians. For many families, their first Harley-Davidson sidecar had once worn Army paint. By the 1920s, the sidecar faced its greatest challenge. Not mechanical, but cultural. America was changing fast. The Roaring Twenties brought prosperity, and cars grew cheaper every year. The Ford Model T, once a dream, became affordable even to factory workers. By 1925, it sold for just $260. In reality, the Harley Sidecar could not compete. What it lacked was enclosure, comfort, and the prestige of a car. The most obvious example was social perception. A man pulling up in a Model T was admired. A man pulling up with his family in a sidecar rig was pitied. Harley continued selling them, but fewer every year. The unexpected consequence was a cultural shift. Motorcycles lost their image as family machines. Instead, they returned to being symbols of individuality, rebellion, and risk. The era of the family motorcycle was over. And yet, the 1912 Harley-Davidson Sidecar left behind something profound. For families who could not afford cars, it was their only chance at shared mobility. For soldiers, it was a machine of survival and duty. And for Harley-Davidson, it proved the company could expand beyond simple two-wheelers, adapting to the needs of the moment. Today, sidecars are rare. They appear in parades, in films, in nostalgic collections. But for those who remember, they symbolize a time when motorcycles weren't just for rebels or racers. They were for fathers and mothers, children and soldiers, traveling together in an uncertain world. What if Harley-Davidson's Sidecar had rivaled the affordability and prestige of Ford's Model T? History might remember motorcycles not as the machines of the lone rider, but as America's first true family car, on three wheels. Instead, it remains a relic of an era when mobility meant compromise and when freedom was shared from the saddle of a motorcycle and the cramped seat of a sidecar.